speakers, we have John Crowcroft, Marconi Professor of Communication Systems in the Computer Laboratory and Special Advisor to the Alan Turing Institute. Right after, we're going to have Samira Jayadeva, who is a researcher in data justice and global ethic features at the Alan Turing Institute. Please, I'm not going to say this then, but do notice the boots that Samira chose today. It's part of the thing. And then after we're going to have our first break, and after the break, we're going to have Bastian Grishakitsavavas. Was that okay? Apologies. The daiquiris don't help. Who is a senior researcher in the Tools, Practice and Systems program. Can you guess where? This is good programming of the audience. And then finally, we have Joe Bourne, who is a Partnership Development Manager at the Alan Turing Institute, but also a PhD student in Lancaster University. So those are our speakers. But tonight, they're actually not going to be speaking as themselves because, and now everything broke. Oh, we're back. We're going to travel together, but we're going to travel through well, they travel through time. And we invite you all to bring your childlike enthusiasm and your imagination on this journey with us. The idea came about, actually, when we were thinking how we can convey all of these, what would be a good format to break all of these conversations that we have about the future? How can we actually have it in a more engaging way, and it, kind of outside of the box thinking, and that's how this idea showed up. So we got, as I mentioned before, visionaries joining us today, and we will explore the myriad possibilities that artificial intelligence might bring to our world in the coming decades. So they will guide us through short and thought-provoking scenarios, and then all of these have been drawn up but from their rich experiences, unique perspectives, and all of the inspiration they will tell you about. Each of them have been given a year, and they've been given a mood. So I have to tell you, some of them, the alcohol will be a helper, but that will be okay. But be aware that what they say is mostly roleplay, and it does not necessarily reflect their opinions. We're going to hear their actual opinions on the questions. What is this? Oh. I was setting the scene from the future. It was interrupted from 2024. That's okay. We're back. So, as I said, it's not necessarily their opinions. Their opinions coming later. You can ask them everything. They will tell you the truth, hopefully. So, we've asked them to tell us all of their ideas, and what does AI and what does our world, or the universe, look like in 2050, 2064, 2074, and 2084. Without further ado, let's have our first time traveler. So please, I'll ask you to start clapping because we have someone from 2050. Yeah, more enthusiasm. Come on, mate. We have John.
Hey. I really feel old now. So, yeah, hi, I'm Xander in from 2050. I'm going to tell you what things look like out there. The take-home, and this means you can go to the bar in 2 minutes rather than sit through the whole of my talk or stand within my talk, is that actually the planet doesn't look great, but people, in a pinch, come together and do some really cool stuff. So that's kind of the summary. So we're looking at what's happening to the world we live in and on and around. We can hear about things further afield later, but not for me. So excuse me, I'm using notes. The nice thing about paper is it doesn't need a battery, and it's kind of quite long-lasting. Back in 25. The kids started to realize that we're really in bad shape. There are a couple of things that are really going in bad shape, and we're looking at tipping points here. We're looking at systems which is the combination of all these different features that interact in complex ways that are going exponential. And the problem with exponential is that people aren't good at grasping exponentials. They don't really get that. But that's what tipping points are. They're essentially when processes do things like doubling. And we're looking at a couple of these things. One is global heating. We're heading probably likely towards 3 degrees on 25 global heating. What does that do? Well, one of the things it does is it probably knocks all the ice off the Antarctic continent. So what does that do? Well, the knock-on effect of that is the sea level rises, and it basically swamps all the coastal cities of the US. Lots of other places too, obviously, if you're from the Netherlands, or Venice, whatever. But the reason it matters, and we start with the US, is of course that's a global economy, and it will tank at that point. And when it tanks, all kinds of horrible things go wrong. So this is kind of a thing we'd like to think about, ahead of that. And so a bunch of the kids, when I was a kid, I was involved in XR. We decided we needed to invest in the Ministry of the Future. And apologies to fans of King Stanley Robinson, but we took the idea from his great book, and we decided it would try to align incentives more rapidly, 5 times faster if possible, to actually fix these processes that were going to kill death across the planet. And we didn't succeed. And even when we went to more extreme measures, where we noticed that the hypocritical, greedy people that were running some of the systems that were running amok were still flying around in their Learjets frequently, and we decided we just take them down. Right? This is unacceptable. They are literally causing megadeaths. That's not great. So we started the military wing against the revolutionaries of the Ministry of the Future, and still not enough. And when you look at this, 2030, things are not looking great. You have frequent weeks across the middle of the planet, middle half of the planet, we're going around where the wet bulb temperature exceeds 50 degrees C, which is not survivable. So moving away from your surrounding coastal region inland is not going to work. And there's not a lot of space in the top of the volcanoes in Westland. So this is becoming really problematic. And you know what? We knew this was coming because being invested in AI in a really big way, we had these fantastic models of climate. We had these predictions about what would happen based on the physics models of the atmosphere and the ocean, absolutely astonishing, really clever machine learned models based on sensing data from oceanographic and atmospheric sensing that were really getting precise. That they said this is what's going to happen. And we could even use those to advise people in positions of policy that there possibly some interventions. Maybe look at geoengineering some things. You could reduce solar radiation hitting the planet with crazy stuff like solar sails, maybe just sulfur seeding. The problem is that you need to align lots of people's behavior, and we've already shown that didn't work. You need people to agree not to just do it for India, just around the monsoon. So you move the monsoon 6 months away or 5,000 kilometers away, and then 6 months later you have no food because you didn't have water for your crops. But you did drown everyone in East Africa. So this is it's a problematic world, and we had a lot of good technical ideas. We stole cycles from the Hype Cloud, the cloud that connected all the clouds, cloud computing, all big data centers. And around 2030, we were able to steal a few cycles, do even better predictions than we knew the doom was on the horizon. And we actually knew that one of the principal causes by 2030 was the electricity consumption of the cloud. If you look at the trends from 25 to 2030, 2025 to 2030, you're looking at a single data center in East Coast of America using more electricity than the metro area of New York. That's a fact. That's a thing. How does that work if what it's being used for is to create really good Gen AI avatars to sell you more goods that can't be made in any sustainable way that you don't need, and sea level is just trickling over the sea defences everywhere. So not a good situation. In a weird way, luckily, very shortly afterwards, the sea levels went a bit higher and the economies tanked, and the business of targeted advertising became really a thing of the past. Thing of recommender engines for Netflix movies, in fact, streaming became a thing of the past. So then, we start to get a bit desperate. You have these people kind of retreating into smaller and smaller areas of land, and we'd like to coordinate response. So this is where I think humans are amazing in a pinch. And if you read this wonderful book by Solnit about the building a paradise in hell. I really, really recommend. It says, people will come together and come up with cool ideas. So one of the things we realized was we needed the internet. We didn't have any electricity, but we had a model of the internet. And it's the clacks. Anyone here know what the clacks are? Oh no, just ask. Thank you. Somebody knows. I can explain it later. Optical telegraphs. Works really well, no electricity, you just need some elves to run it. They don't use people. Anyway, it's better than burning beacons and fires on hills, because that's counterindicated if you're trying to reduce carbon emissions and look at fire, whereas optical telegraph is pretty good. But then what about computation? So it turns out, computation, we have things like this. This was given to me by a professor at Stanford University. He got it, he was an Englishman who sadly died recently, but he got it from UCL Statistics Department. This is a cylindrical slide rule. This was made in 1930. It still works in 2050. It still works in 2024. You could do really precise calculations. 100 people getting together and cooperating to do a distributed computation could work out a route for a spaceship from Earth to the nearest exoplanet using 100 of these really precisely. But more usefully, when you don't have a space service, launching stuff, because Elon Musk has gone somewhere, even Mars, who knows. You might actually work out where the fish are, and you might work out where to plant kelp, and you might work out how to maximize biodiversity, and you could do models for that. You don't need to use all the electricity of metro area in New York to do that. You can do very simple models that are pretty precise. If you can fly a spaceship to an exoplanet 10 light years away, you can certainly do some simple predictions. So that certainly, was a thing that where people came together, they realized this, and it turns out, really luckily, back in your day, you may know that the Turing Institute is housed in the British Library. The British Library is up in King's Cross. Now, where we're currently standing, in my time travel here, we would be about 4 meters under sea level. This was marshland back in Rome. This is literally, why is it called that? South London. That's why people like me from North London, we don't come here. Sorry, let's get that in. Not fair. We go to Notting Hill, and then we might go to Brixton if we're going south to get us the penny. So this is quite cool. Meanwhile, though, so there's this whole world which is shifting, and there's this whole changes that are happening, and we're trying to figure out where we can go. The British Library, it turns out, is actually 18 meters above sea level. So it's pretty clear. You can sort of see the lapping, very wide Thames estuary just down the road. UCL is underwater, sorry, UCL. The British Library is just okay. And that's good, because all the knowledge is there. So we have these technologies, the clacks. If you're interested, by the way, if you use the World Wide Web, Terry Pratchett's name is engraved in the stone-based messages that HTTP carries over every single web browser. Talking to the internet was used on the flags, which is very cool. So it's very easy to reproduce all the World Wide Web on access to the British Library knowledge using the clacks. And then it says how to use one of these things, which is not that complicated, but it is a cylindrical slide rule, which is a little bit strange to get your head around, a bit like exponentials. Okay, so that's pretty much it for my talk. The last thing I was going to say is, in 2050, obviously there are kind of things that are good. We're really good at fishing and kelp farming, and we're really good at figuring out, where we can fly into a safe land and how do you make antibiotics without big factories and all kinds of things like that. What do you think the kids really miss most? Anyone? That's good, but they didn't know that. It's 25 years. It's been gone for 15. So what are the kids miss most? I'm going to say, sadly, the electric guitar.
Thank you. Everyone has a mood lift right now, right? It's so exciting. I don't know how to swim. It's going to be great. So, are you ready for the next feature? Because we're going to have another visitor from 2064. Start clapping. I want to hear it in the back. And we have Samira from 2064.
I was just waiting for a bit more fluff. All right, welcome everyone. Hi, my name is Mera. I'm actually an art curator from Mars, so bear with me whilst I use this piece of paper. Space stuff is very hard. But before I get started on my talk, I want to give a first big shout out to my sponsors. Shout out to Lagoon. They've been instrumental in my journey coming here, but they've also been instrumental in making sure the middle Isle of Little reaches even Mars. but what happened between now and 2064, when I've come from? Well, the years reaching up to 2064 confronted a myriad of challenges, some of which John has already very dreadfully pointed out. Our environment is at a collapse, social relations are beyond broken, and our future is increasingly unwelcome. But as we are human, we persist. And we confronted these fears and worries through art. Art is seldom aroused in vacuum, but comes out of very human relations. And for the last few centuries, we have used art to confront our relationship with machines. Take our approach to art at the turn of the first industrial revolution. We had the arts and crafts movement, we had the Art Nouveau movement, where these artists across the transatlantic came together and witnessed that dirt, that grime, the pollutants, and really those distressing labor conditions, and thought of bringing life to paintings that centered organic life forms. Think more exotic birds like a peacock side by side with the most beautiful blooming flowers. They rejected mass production and hoped to mask those smog-filled factories with concepts like poetry, reimagined through more effeminate muses. But why am I talking about art when we all collectively fail to protect the very planet of those muses, those flowers, and those birds? Well, in the late 2050s, art actually did breathe a new life after decades of latency, wherein music, painting, sculpture, and architecture lived very short lives of viral fame. Gen AI art, of course, only served to fuel the fire of artists combating long-term mediocrity. All of this coincided with our shift from our terrestrial decaying planet to explorations of outer space. Now, this happened because resource exploitation, as John already pointed out, was the worst you can imagine. Our dying planet struggled with decreasing reserves of fuel and minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, which were needed to fuel our fourth industrial revolution of the data age and the fifth industrial revolution of robotics. This resource death, alongside an increasingly greedy 1%, shocked the world into a new demand curve, a demand that would require mining not on a terrestrial planet, but on asteroids. Thus began our sixth industrial revolution, one of space exploration, and eventual R&D for celestial human settlements. While the exploitation of the moon is still an ongoing debate in our UN General Assembly, yes, surprisingly, the UN managed to still hold ground in 2016. Resource mining on asteroids was given legitimacy in international law through the Artemis Accords and the Outer Space Treaty. I think you already have that going on right now. However, because of economic pressures, government space agencies weren't the ones traveling and mining the asteroids. Instead, they began to offer licenses to private companies for space exploration. Of these, we have the trio of SpaceX, Virgin Galactica, and I hate to say it, but Microsoft Astroforager, who are already well into building the machinery and the infrastructure necessary for space exploration. And they won, of course, all of the contracts. Within 2 decades of acquiring the first tranche of licenses, companies began mining in the asteroid belt. The resources weren't for our planet. The long-term strategy was to use space mining for space settlements. And I would like to point out now that celestial bodies like the moon and Mars are still terra nullius, or the property of no one. But establishing research hubs similar to Antarctica, remember Antarctica? Yeah. Our earthly terra nullius, it faced far fewer legal battles. And with this new era of space exploration, there was also rejuvenation in art and architecture. We welcomed the space renaissance. This new movement aimed to capture the plight of human exploitation alongside natural exploitation. Some artists found their canvas in the design of research hubs on Mars, one of which I live on, and while others confronted this corporate takeover of our near space more terrestrially. And I would like to sit with the second group for a moment, particularly through the Mahishisme group of the Congo. For those in the audience aware of the horrendous conditions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, you might be wondering how this country managed to survive collapse even in 2016. Well, after years of political and economic unrest underpinned by mineral exploitation in provinces like the Goma, a series of political leaders not only sustained a collective movement without a military coup, but they also put in place a healthy-ish democracy. Moreover, they now used a new resource to their advantage. No longer were the mines in Goma central to Congo's story. It was now the geographic proximity to the equator which firmly established itself as a launch nation. Simply put, it's far cheaper and less resource intensive for mining missions to be launched from countries closer to the equator. Essentially, when a rocket is propelled from west to east, it takes advantage of the Earth's rotational field and that speed being necessary to escape Earth's gravitation. All that science aside, while the Congo did become a financial success story, political leaders of the Congo were also reckoning with their past, one driven by child laborers and devastating conditions caused by mining. So they financed this Mahishisme movement. It's a Swahili word meaning existence. The Mahishisme group's founders confronted their existence through ancestral strife and trauma, alongside their existence in a future that could bring them harmony. They were instrumental, of course, in building the launch sites and the flight control buildings. Now, what did these new buildings look like? If you can imagine a mine, if you've ever seen pictures of what the DRC probably looks like right now, it is similar in the sense that it featured multi-level entranceways to mimic the deep gorges cut into the earth, and within, of course, the lush forests of the Congo. And at the center of this building, and truly the center of the metaphor of the Mahishisme, an open courtyard which featured native trees and benches. And this space welcomed visitors, and they welcomed the employees, more importantly, to sit down and really reflect on this race for mineral exploitation. A reminder that the race for profits once kept children out of schools in the very mines they are now standing upon. That once those unfortunate enough to be employed or even enslaved to those mines, they dreamt only of basic comforts, food, water, shelter. A reminder that the minerals, on Earth or beyond, are feeding an incessant drive for new technology. A reminder that the supercomputers you are now using are feeding are absolutely necessary, and that is only going to be fueled by those mines. And this, of course, applies to all of the phones in the audience and all the technology we see around us. But all of this is a reminder that once all of these minerals came from hardships, and it came from death, both of old and the very, very young. Now, tomorrow, miners will send more asteroid chunks for the development of those research townships on the Moon and the Mars. Despite only a few hundred individuals employed to work on these research stations on our celestial sisters, they are now changing the culture of all of our planets and our outer space. Yes, Adidas Sambas are still the rage, and there are areas of gentrification because poorer nations are increasingly finding it hard to join in the research efforts of our near-space celestial bodies. However, since years of the opening of the research townships, which I used to feel proud to have contributed to, I find myself wondering if this communal space for reflection is truly influencing our drive for profit. Instead, maybe it just serves as a facade for greed and our unmatched exploitative powers. Like the Art Nouveau movement and the anti-war posters of the 1960s, which used very similar designs, art seemingly struggled to gather the momentum for collective change. Harder still in the face of profit motives. Maybe in another 50 years, maybe we do find that utopia. You know, art doesn't make you feel better, but it can give you hope. It won't change the world, but it is giving us an artifact with which we can remember the past and with which it can serve our future. And for the audience here today, you may have heard that the Congo found stability and that they have some semblance of hope in the future. But I urge you not to sit back whilst people face war, conflict, and death. Our collective decision to stand up against exploitation is not only integral to art, but is integral to our sense of humanity, even if it's a new way of humanity in Mars. Thank you so much.
So this next one needs a little bit of preparation. We're all going to get ready for it. I hope you brought your party hats. We all have ours, so it's on you. So everyone, please start clapping from 2074. Come on,
Hello everyone. Can you hear me okay? So it's really, really nice to be here tonight because it's a very special night for me because back in 2074, my good friend Joe was turning 50 tonight. He was born literally this day, today in 2020. And I thought we could all celebrate together a little bit, and I will start with a little speech, and don't worry, there will be some cake and some cookies, and there will be singing later on. But for now, let's just talk a bit about how Joe's lifetime went. So, Because the time now in 2074 is really, really different. We look back from 2074 to today, saying this is the year that the AI, generative AI hype cycle really is like on the very, very top. It's the gold rush topic of the day today. And the UK government just this year in your timeline has doubled down on this being the hot topic. They want to get into all spheres of life. They want AI in healthcare, education, crime prevention, immigration, and access to public services. And of course, in the future, in your future, you will see how this will be implemented really quickly and not in the most thoughtful way, unfortunately, because you know how it is. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So be prepared for a lot of public services to really be increased by AI and enhanced by AI in the name of increasing productivity and saving money. And these systems have locally developed, despite Brexit, many imported from abroad. We will see here. And these AI systems really affected my friend Joe from a very, very early life on. Because instead of investing into healthcare professionals, what we see in the future is how AI will be taking over frontline work in the NHS. So it's 2028, and my friend Joe, actually, their parents are worried about whether they might have an invisible disability, but they cannot get hold of any healthcare workers. Instead, now it's AI chatbots that are running the NHS in the first stage, and if you try to call out, they will just tell you whether you can see a doctor or not. And in Joe's case, unfortunately, the answer was no. So now the chatbots gave the diagnosis of everything being fine, and as a result, Joe in school never got the support they actually would have needed, which of course set them up for more and more challenges going down the line. Their struggles in school remained unaddressed because now also schools were enhanced by AI. We had AI predictive evaluation in schools, which was not trained to take into account that students might potentially have medical problems which were not diagnosed, so they just assumed he was a bad student. Back in 2042, then a few years down the line, when Joe had aged out of the school system, they unfortunately, but somewhat unsurprisingly, really struggled to keep any employment or even find any. And this was despite, or maybe because now also AI being deployed for assigning people to jobs, or rather force them to take jobs where I thought there was a job that a person could be doing. But at the end of the day, these systems tended to give up on people, especially for those the systems assumed it was not worth investing any more money in getting people into employment. And so Joe and their family, they spent a lot of years fighting for getting any benefits. And it really was a fight because AI was now deployed there as well, and it didn't make it any easier. In time-honored tradition, in the UK, we know how it is when government departments and software accuse people of fraudulently receiving things. We've had this quite recently already in this timeline, so it's a thing that of course happened there as well. And they struggled, and of course it was not just Joe and their family being affected by this. There were hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people across the country struggling with the new AI bureaucracy that was really entrenched across all sectors of life. So by 2048, there was a really widespread discontent with AI and the automated oppression dished out by it, leading to thousands of people across the country going to protests, calling for another AI winter to save both, we thought, our environment, but also society. And beyond these protests, we also saw a lot of direct action happening. There was a new AI from below movement, which Joe actually was quite instrumental in co-founding along with a couple of friends, and they really drove it forward. They started to investigate how and why our AI systems kept failing beyond the really poor implementation of them. And they, instead of using the technology-first approach, took a people and problem-centric approach first. They looked at the existing AI solutions and very quickly discovered what one of the problems was, which was that these AI systems just kept predicting towards the averages or the most likely outcomes, and then we collectively assumed that this would mean the best or correct outcome. And of course, because for all the advanced mathematics and technology going into this, they just predict on the averages, which was nothing new back in the 21st century at the beginning of it. Right now, people already want about this. Even sci-fi authors back in 2023, like Ted Chiang, already wrote about how AI is the blurry JPEG of going, referring to how these systems typically just regurgitate the existing data and give you an average outcome as a result. He used this to refer to ChatGPT, which you will know, knowing, and of course the kids in the future learn from Wikipedia. But as it turns out, we all know none of us is really average. You still know cars, and you know how in cars you can put the seats back and forth to adjust them for your height, because we are all not average across different dimensions. It's not so hard to understand at the end of the day. And what Joe and their friends also found is how the AI not only generates average outcomes, but also these average data come from average data that, of course, has all the biases, discriminations, issues encountered within the historic data. So, let's say, hypothetically, police tended to over-police marginalized communities. Or if we assume that checks for social security fraud are particularly targeting only certain demographics, let's say deprived neighborhoods, people with disabilities, or other already marginalized people. Well, in those cases, it's easy to see AI was particularly likely to negatively affect and decide wrongly over these communities. And we also learned how all attempts to address these overtly prejudiced systems just push them to instead becoming more fair, to become covertly prejudiced instead. Instead of picking out direct markers, they looked at how people spoke or wrote, things like this. So in the end, this led to Joe and their friends to set out to do their own AI and data science research to create both the missing data that they thought we would need, and also create the AI they thought would be useful to them personally. And in a way, that's not surprising, given how nothing about us without us has been a rallying cry for disability rights for many, many years. This has been adopted by many marginalized groups. It's no surprise it happened there as well for the AIs from below. They collectively took inspiration from some of the examples of movement-driven data collections for advocacy and citizens-driven research that's happening right now already in 2024. What they found was communities that created their own census data to collect the missing data to understand how they as a community were marginalized and disadvantaged. They found collectives of gig workers working for food delivery or ride-sharing companies, pooling their data to collectively understand how much or how little they were being paid rather than using this to unionize. They found people who were having chronic conditions to collectively engage in patient-led research to create AI systems that provided medical interventions they wanted and needed. And they found communities of trans people and disabled people collecting their own data to fight back against medicalization and to instead create, again, the outputs and research they needed to improve their own lives. And of course, by their nature, all of these systems were quite small and localized. But at the same time, people were making fun of them for this reason. So throughout the 2050s, we saw it slowly taking place. And slowly, this practice became more and more accepted. After years of us having AI to be deployed at a large scale to resolve all of society's issues, people recognized the benefits of small-scale, localized, and community-driven AI approaches. And ultimately, of course, even the government had to give in, seeing that it didn't work. And they stopped deploying one-size-fits-all AI in 2069, finally. Of course, you will have heard of other time travelers tonight who said that it's not only just the community that brings this together, but it's of course also helped by us running out of resources, plain and simple. You cannot train AI if there's no water and electricity, so small scale is actually winning. So thanks climate change for helping us on. But of course, it's not the lesson Joes they want to celebrate tonight and their fellow researchers. With their efforts, we understood how this local and situated knowledge could be paired with really tailor-made AI that was created by, more importantly, in service of communities. Back in 2074, we think that this is by now a really old idea that goes back for over 100 years, so already you could be reading literature today. We know that science and technology promote humanization. It requires that we people are active participants in research and are not just a mere object of the scientific interest. And thanks to Joe and all of their friends, we are now on this path more than ever before. And with this, let's all raise a glass and celebrate Joe. Happy birthday.
It's very odd to be here talking about AI and big data. In 2084, AI and big data era is boring, intangible, and uncontroversial as radio, cars, or radar for you today. It's entirely taken for granted that AI is a part of every part of life in 2084, and similarly, and more importantly, public understanding can be taken for granted, though not necessarily reliable. I'll come back to that because I'm sure you first want me to paint a picture of how wonderful everything is in 2084, right? So, what's changed? Well, no flying cars, I'm afraid, but there is an autonomous vehicle now. Ooh. Right, so these self-driving taxis, we take them everywhere, everyone takes them, and they come in 3 price models. You can pay standard, where you get personalized adverts where you would expect Windows to be. Or you can get ad-free, you get Windows, but you pay a bit more and you pay with data. Or you can have private, where your location data isn't logged while you drive. So, other advancements include health innovations, such as heart attack prediction sensors, which are in all public spaces now, design of drugs, and vastly improved air quality. AI guides you through public spaces in the way that it knows you need what, even before you do. And public spaces anticipate social disorder using AI and CCTV. Great, how harmonious must that be? Huge savings in public infrastructure and services have been reinvested into art, care, and education. And this is the real headline for AI. And I'm afraid, again, it's very boring to point to emphasize that welcome to 2084, we no longer need more or faster growth. It's a kind of thing of the past, really. We're just super efficient now. Some things haven't changed at all. There's still potholes in roads. I don't have an Alexa still. In fact, voice assistants kind of went the way of 3D movies, to be honest. And nobody has a brain chip. I still use a phone. In fact, it's the same phone I've used for 20 years because I can guess it myself now. The one area where there's been huge leaps, as I've already mentioned, is public understanding of big data and all technology underpins such as AI. It is perhaps best to compare that understanding instead of bread and cars, like I said at the start. Let's take electricity, for example, something really nice, invisible, and intangible. Electricity isn't magical to you here in 2024, but the public has public understanding of its actual workings is actually a little bit shallow and often based on simplified understandings. We can, however, think of lots of applications or ways to improve these things without needing a full understanding. We also know, more or less, how to use them safely. The same is true of big data in 2024. People are sort of able to quantify it, they understand thousands of ways to apply it, they know lots of benefits and some harms. And crucially, they know how to opt out. It wasn't easy to get to this place. Everyone has their own personal journey and story of how they realised the great privacy invasion had gone too far. Mine was when I received an IKEA catalogue that had detailed layouts of my house, where my furniture is, and where I prefer to spend my time. Now that's a little bit creepy, but what's creepier is that a few weeks previous to that, I changed my Wi-Fi provider, and they provided these really snazzy, extra powerful routers for free. Now, just to explain the technology very briefly, it's very easy to encrypt my data, and I do look after my data in those, it's being communicated by those Wi-Fi waves. You can't hide the waves themselves, and you can use them to detect things and people within a physical environment, and that's what was happening. But I didn't really have a leg to stand on. I struggled to articulate exactly how my privacy had been invaded. I'd signed the terms and conditions, and to be honest, quite a lot of people liked the IKEA catalog. So, that wasn't going to make a difference. Then other things started going wrong. There were awful attacks and doxing of women whose menstruation tracking apps revealed behavioural choices their families didn't agree with. Disability benefits started to be cut when people had been deemed to be too active, according to the public footfall counters. Thousands of asylum claims were rejected because people had been detected in towns a mile away from the towns that they'd written on their journey logs. And social housing tenants found virtual time locks were put on their washing machines and ovens if they were deemed to be using them too much. There was a lot of individual activism. People were ripping down sensors or tampering with sensors, or the more creative stuff, like holding open a cigarette lighter under an air quality monitor, or the organised mass walk-bys of footfall counters to create confusing data sets. But this was still fringe activity and often dismissed as tin hat conspiracies. But then there was the Great Sussex Tidal Wave. Don't worry, not an actual tidal wave, but rather flooding that was predicted based on very accurate data. The mistake we made, perhaps, was in 2048, trusting all of our property valuation forecasting to AI. That was great. It stabilised the market. It made oil prices much more stable and much more accessible. Hooray! However, in 2058, the AI used data on sea level rises and the vulnerability of Sussex to forecast that all properties would lose all their values within 50 years, and that should be reflected immediately. So lots of people lost lots of money. Then there was an election issue. Okay, so the Rainbow Fairness National Party made it their top election pledge to completely transform the country's laws, regulation, infrastructure, and use of data. This led to the Great Data Empowerment. People were able to collect, wrangle, process, and communicate big data themselves. Suddenly it was not those with the means and access, like social media companies, infrastructure providers, and governments, but us ourselves. We could tell our stories. In fact, stories themselves have changed in 2085. Politics is no longer stories of hope and fear, but facts. Causation or correlation, input and output. and no fake news. We know the value of our own data to ourselves, to the public, to society, and to those who want to monetize it, which, by the way, includes us monetizing our own data. I'll come to those. So, of course, this also means we know the drawbacks of big data and that people are not data, or data is not people. The really noticeable manifestation of this empowerment came in the rejection of data collection. Half a century after the EU's right to be forgotten, we have the right to be ignored. People with surveillance concerns are no longer referred to as tin hat. We understand that you don't need to be breaking the law to have something worth hiding. And we know the potential harms of big data on marginalised communities. No longer are you asked to reject or accept cookies. No longer do you have to opt out. You can just choose to opt in if you want to. And that's where this comes in. So everyone, this is my data controller. Everyone has their own data controller. You can buy them, but like most people, I built mine myself. Like I say, education has come a long way in 2024. Also, they are quite difficult to buy because, unsurprisingly, a lot of the big tech firms who are quite reliant on big data were quite slow to get into the business of making data blocking. So I can use this to detect the number of sensors in the physical environment. I can dial up my appetite of sense depending on how I feel each day. Physical adware? You guys don't have that yet, do you? That's good luck with that. It can generate obfuscating data to hide me in my environment. It also allows me to monetize my data. It acts as a little bit of a middle person there, an edge box which collects my data before it then gets sent to whoever wants it. And I can choose to not send it, or I can choose to send it with conditions, or I can sell it to the highest bidder, or to you, or the bar. Of course, the world's not perfect, and we're still dealing with a lot of legacy sensors. You guys really need to chill out with the sensors. You're a big fan of them in the 20s. It terrifies me how many of you have in this pub alone, and that's why I brought back some of our big data labels and lucky buttons for you to see. So, I borrowed some labels from the future. You'll see them all around the bar, there, on the bar. These are telling you how data is being collected, who's collecting it, what they're doing with it, whether it's being monetized. It's all pretty simple iconography. I'm sure you can understand it. Of course, there are times when you won't have your data control on you, or you may not have access to one, but you still want your privacy. This was therefore why there was a national rollout of Nucky buttons. Anyone can press these to temporarily disable sensors retaining or communicating any data for the next hour, or until someone turns it back on. Finally, I did mention that the tech firms that rely on big data extraction and analysis, such as those who had previously earned money from advertising or AI, are still here. Indeed, many are more useful than ever. The big difference being that they're no longer free to you or I, or the services rely on, and that cost does get passed on to us. But personally, I found that the selling of my data tends to balance that out, and I also find that I'm a little bit more conscious of how I'm using those things now that they're not free. There are also new types of business that are offering you a service where they'll just manage your data and buying and selling for you for a monthly fee, so that's nice. Now, I fancy a nice cold 2024 lager, and there's loads of substances in this place. So I should have plenty of data to trade at the bar, unless one of you's pressed the lucky button on the bar, in which case, does anybody want to buy my foot film count for the last fortnight?